Hi, welcome to the very first episode of the Romanticize. My name is Kylie. This is Kyle. And we're just so excited to be back. We haven't talked about Ring of Honor in a long time. And I know we've both been really chomping at the bit. And we have a special episode for you. Kyle, do you want to introduce the topic of this episode?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked, we haven't talked on camera. Yeah. We're still getting that ROH love out there. But now with Halloween around the corner, I really felt like, okay, what's something that we can do to talk about that's really thematically appropriate? And because ROH has never really done the spooky, they've never really done the supernatural. That's not really been a thing they've ever done. I don't believe they've ever even done anything Halloween themed in amongst their non-canon shows. So let's go bloody. And when it comes to ROH, they generally did not get bloodier than Fights Without Honor. For those of you who don't know, this was ROH's ultimate gimmick match. Realistically, it was more or less a street fight. I mean, let's be clear. It wasn't anything, earth-shattering. But this was the match that when you needed it settled, you went to a Fight Without Honor.
Yes. And for any, new Ring of Honor fans, converted Ring of Honor fans, as much as we talk about Ring of Honor being, gritty, grimy, whatever, there's an honor code in Ring of Honor. So when you get to the fight, these Fights Without Honor, it's sort of like, it's as real as it gets for wrestling, at least in my opinion. They're really for the, and especially the ones we're going to talk about today, hate-fueled feuds. It's not just a one-off. There's no exhibition matches here. These are like stories upon stories. So of course it's perfect for this podcast. So do you want to just jump right into it? Kyle and I both compiled lists of our favorite Fights Without Honor. It turns out there's significant overlap. So we're just going to feel out the episode. We're just going to talk about these great matches and hope you guys enjoy it. So the first one on the list, all the way back to 2003, which shockingly was 19 years ago, John Walters versus Xavier. So I hadn't seen this match, I don't think, when it first aired, but I've since gone back to see it. And honestly, I think this match, with the exception of a match I'm going to talk about later with a certain Adam Cole, this might be my favorite on the list. I think it's just, especially for the time, I felt like the offense was very innovative.
Yeah, this one kind of came out of nowhere. It was kind of a mid-card feud, realistically. I mean, yes, Xavier was a former Ring of Honor champion at this point, and John Walters was, always in the pure title mix. He was the pure champion for a while. So, these are guys that had been decorated in the company, but this was kind of just a thing that came out of nowhere, and it came together in the span of a couple of months. It started in ROH's Field of Honor tournament in 2003 that started at one of the Glory by Honor shows. And it was basically another different style tournament to reach a number one contender kind of thing. ROH has done a number of those over the years. And in our first round matchup, we had John Walters versus Xavier. And Xavier won with a low blow and a roll up. At this point, he was part of the prophecy. So he wasn't going to be shaking hands. He wasn't going to be following the code of honor anyway. And part of this was Xavier kept winning this way. That was literally all the feud was, that John Walters wanted to do it honorably and do it with pure wrestling. And Xavier kept taking shortcuts after shortcut after shortcut. They were low blows. There was a tag match with Xavier teamed with Nigel McGuinness, who was just sort of rising up the ranks at that point in Ring of Honor, against the really interesting team of John Walters and Tony Mamaluke. Nigel takes out Walters, and then Xavier steals the cheap pin again. And at this point, Walters is losing his mind. He wants to get this guy. It is driving him crazy. And Walters finally gets a win over him, but it's a flash pin. It's a pure wrestling hold, and he just sort of catches him in a roll up and gets the win. But Xavier immediately gets his revenge, beats him down again, and we finally go into it. It comes to final battle. This is where all the stories come to a head. We need to settle it between these guys. Fight Without Honor, John Walters versus Xavier.
Yeah, and I think looking back at this period of Ring of Honor, I don't think that either of these guys are quintessential Ring of Honor guys. At this point in time, I don't think fans look back at this match or even this final battle event and they're like, oh yeah, that's emblematic of Ring of Honor. But I encourage most people to go back and watch it. I think the story told here, sort of this tension between being honorable or being just a guy who's out for himself, just really wants to win no matter the cost, and someone who isn't really committed to Ring of Honor and the, sort of Ring of Honor lifestyle. This is something we see in Ring of Honor moving forward a lot. These guys coming in, they won a title. They don't really care about being in Ring of Honor or being a Ring of Honor guy. So to me, I think that's what really makes this entire feud and this match really special.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, there was a lot of truly impressive stuff for the time. Xavier's offense was always solid. He was an underrated guy. It was very exciting, actually, when Prince Nana brought him back to challenge Jay Lethal at one point during Lethal's, I forget which title run it was, but it was one of his world title runs that Nana brought Xavier back as a special mystery guest challenger. We actually lost Xavier back in 2020. Heart problems, if I'm not mistaken. So, he will go down for that as well. But this was interesting because of the push and pull to me with John Walters. Like, this is not how he likes to compete. This is not the type of match he wants. He's not a guy who's tables and chairs and chains and, ladders, and this is not his style of match. And I feel like you saw some of that in some of the spots that he would hit over the course of this match, like the finish of the lung blower sort of off a ladder kind of, and it looked just brutal, but because he doesn't work like this. So yeah, it added that very raw kind of feel to it, and it gave it that extra little element of hate that kind of put it over the top. Like, I don't like doing this, but I'm going to do it because I want revenge on you.
Yeah, it's always really interesting to see these guys who were almost stereotypical professional wrestlers. They're dedicated, athletes, and they're really committed to this thing. It's really interesting to see them go from sort of discomfort with the idea of this, brutal fight without honor into, like you said, these really big spots. So overall, I definitely think this match, and, I don't know if Ring of Honor is going to get a streaming deal, a TV deal. It certainly seems like Tony Khan has basically confirmed in 2023 that there's going to be Ring of Honor television, which we're both really excited for. And I think it's funny, we've been clamoring for news for so long. But regardless, if there's some place you can access the Ring of Honor library reliably, I think going back and watching this match is well worth it if you want to understand Ring of Honor, but also this entire match stipulation.
Also, there's Final Battle 2003 is kind of fun if you're a New Japan fan, because it's the only time that CM Punk was in the same ring with Tomoaki Honma. Honma was there as part of a talent sharing deal with All Japan, and he and a partner who's were taking on CM Punk and in a tag match. So if you ever wanted to see Punk versus Honma, for the 3 people out there that think that would be kind of fun, then there you go. There's all sorts of forgotten gems in the catalog. But yeah, moving along, the next one that was on my countdown was actually the first Fight Without Honor. It was from Glory by Honor. It was 20 years ago in October of 2002. So
that's a long time.
So I was 4 years old, and this was Low Ki versus Samoa Joe. Now we're getting into some names that people will recognize and remember. This was Samoa Joe's Ring of Honor debut. And this is also significant for being the first Fight Without Honor that didn't really have a build to it between the competitors. This was, there was definitely a thing between Low Ki and the Prophecy. Christopher Daniels' group, the Prophecy, was a major driving factor of conflict in the main event scene in early Ring of Honor. He and Donovan Morgan won the tag titles in the initial tag title tournament. He and the Prophecy were involved in Low Ki losing the title in the first place at the show previous to this Glory by Honor. Actually, the Prophecy helped Low Ki lose the title to Xavier, and then to sort of head off Low Ki from coming back after the title, they threw a hired gun at Low Ki in the form of Samoa Joe. And because the Prophecy was the Prophecy and didn't fight with honor, they just decided to make this a fight without honor. At the time, I don't know if they knew that this stipulation would take off the way that it did. It may have just been a thing where they decided, this is a fun, catchy thing to call this. And
yeah,
I wonder that.
Maybe someone watching this knows. Maybe someone knows all like the inside scoops on old school Ring of Honor and can let us know.
But no, so we brought in Samoa Joe and Low Ki, and this one, I'm sure you've seen this one. This is on the ROH YouTube channel as well, so you can track it down there if you haven't seen it. And it would not be out of place in a New Japan Never Openweight showdown today. Even 20 years ago, this match would fit today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in terms, like in the brand, like broad scope of it, I think people think fight without honor. They think like chairs and ladders in a lot of cases, but this was a wrestling match as much as it was, a fight without honor. I think in terms of like Samoa Joe's career trajectory, if you think everything you know about Samoa Joe, brutal headbutt, strikes, all those sort of things, that was here. This was sort of an outlier in the grand scheme of Fight Without Honor, but it was so brutal simply because everything was so realistic. And they were working stiff, but I think this was on my list. This was, I think, second to my number one. But for Samoa Joe, I think this was major for his career.
It was huge. And Joe would eventually wind up being the one to unseat Xavier to take the Ring of Honor championship. It was not the Ring of Honor world title yet, because Joe would have a falling out with the Prophecy because he was not happy with taking orders from Christopher Daniels. And, there we go. And yeah, this was not what Fights Without Honor would come to be. Like you said, with the chairs, with the tables, with the weapons, with the blood. There wasn't actually any blood, but it was just so stiff and so brutal. The finish was literally strike after strike after strike until one guy collapsed and the other one collapsed on top of him. That was the finish.
And it was really interesting because if you're watching, anything about Low Ki, that his strikes that were like always hard, and there's always sort of a stiff violence to them, and a lot of times there's a loud noise. It's just really incredible to watch. And Samoa Joe, as much as we've come to know him as this guy, he's like the chops guy, and in AEW I think we see a lot of that, putting him up against big, strong, brutal men like he is. Well, at the time it's 2002. So like Low Ki is doing a lot of stuff in North America that you see a lot in Japan, this sort of strong style. And fans weren't used to seeing Low Ki get outstroked, whatever the term is. So this was one of my favorites just because I'm a major Samoa Joe fan. And I love to see Low Ki get what's coming to him. No offense to Low Ki.
Well, great. Now he's never coming on.
Listen, if he wants to, he's always invited.
Oh man. No, this was fantastic, and it is on the Ring of Honor YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of full matches on the Ring of Honor YouTube channel still. Go check it out. It is absolutely fantastic. You'll also learn a little bit about why Gabe Sapolsky says to this day that he's really not much of a play-by-play man, but that's okay. The action is still fantastic. But no, so 100% cannot recommend enough that that you go check this one out. This was number 4 on my list. It was number 2 on Kiley's. Going to number 3 on my list, Roderick Strong versus Eric Stevens from Respect is Earned 2 in June of 2008. This one was started to be very story driven. This was a great selection for that. Actually, Roderick Strong trained Eric Stevens, which was part of how Stevens started to break in the Florida independent scene. They teamed a couple times. They teamed in CZW actually at one point back around 2004 or so. So they were very familiar with each other. This is also notable for starting kind of in earnest outside of ROH. This actually started in Full Impact Pro. For those of you who don't know, Full Impact Pro or FIP started as ROH's sister promotion in 06 or 07, thereabouts. That sort of became, in a way, it was kind of like what we're thinking AEW might be treating ROH like. Yeah. There's that kind of like their talent goes back and forth. They recognize each other's titles, but it started in earnest with Stevens beating Roderick Strong to become the first Florida Heritage Champion, a secondary title for FIP in 2007. Meanwhile, back in ROH, we were getting into the Gang Wars period that some people might remember, where Roderick Strong, Austin Aries, and Jack Evans all had their own groups. And they all fought each other for what seemed like forever. Eric Stevens wound up part of Austin Aries' group. Meanwhile, Strong had his No Remorse Corps with Davey Richards and Rocky Romero. Their first official match in ROH didn't come until September of 07, so we're looking at about 9 months before the Fight Without Honor actually happened. Strong got the win. It was part of a best-of-3 series on that pay-per-view where Aries' group, the Resilience, and Strong's No Remorse Corps were paired off in a series of one-on-one matches, and it was a best-of-3. Strong got the win to win the whole thing for his team. A couple of months later, Stevens would beat Strong for the FIP World Title at Final Battle 2007. Great match. Really, any of the matches between Strong and Stevens were fantastic. They would fit in today. They were super hard hitting. Roderick Strong has always been criminally underrated as an in-ring guy. Eric Stevens held up with him in a big way. They would swap the title back through late 2007, early 2008. But it really kicked up another gear at Supercard of Honor 3 in Orlando at WrestleMania weekend in 2008. Was scheduled for Strong to defend the FIP title against Stevens. They started fighting before the bell because they couldn't hold it in any longer. They had been just every time they met, the violence ticked up a little bit, and then it was weapons, and then it was guardrail shots, table shots. It just kept building. They knocked out multiple officials. The match never started. They just battered each other all around the building in Orlando, and then Strong crossed the line. He lays out Stevens with a chair shot, calls out the No Remorse Corps, and they shave Eric Stevens' mohawk off. For those who didn't know, Stevens had a big honkin' mohawk. That was sort of his trademark deal in the early days in Ring of Honor there. And the No Remorse Corps beat him up and shaved off the mohawk. Beat him, bloodied him, shaved him, humiliated him. This will not stand.
Yeah, and this match had all sort of the hallmarks of like a hardcore match. This was very much, it was just as brutal as, the Low-Key Samoa Joe match. But this, to me, I think fans now would recognize this as more of a hardcore street fight, whatever have you. But I just got to say, I miss in wrestling when we would shave guys' heads. I don't know. There's something like so heelish about humiliating someone and just embarrassing them. I don't know. But I do have to say, Roderick Strong, because where his career has taken him, the things he's done, I think a lot of people forget that Roderick Strong was in Ring of Honor with Tyler Black and Claudio Castagnoli and Bryan Danielson and all these guys who've gone on to be big stars. And I think a lot of that is owed to the success of Ring of Honor and recruiting people, whatever. but I would put Roderick Strong up there in terms of influence on modern wrestling. And I think this match, you know, it's two rivals. You mentioned it's like mentor student, which is a classic wrestling trope. But the match itself, even if you know nothing about the feud, you could get something out of just how horrific this match was in terms of it's hardcore at hardcore. I guess that's the conclusion I'm drawing.
Yeah, it very much was. And, you know, we started off with the same kind of matches that they've had. It was very strike exchanges, very in your face, forearms, chops, because both these guys could throw the lumber 100%. And then it just continued to escalate. It was built very effectively. And it built all the way to a superplex off of probably 12 to 15 foot ladder through two tables. Like, so it contained in this match alone is basically something for everyone.
Yeah, and I think throughout the course of the match, you never get the impression that they're holding something back or that they're like trying to keep themselves safe in any way. It's a wrestling match, of course, it's safe, but it's very much you get the impression that they're all, you know, they're not caring about their personal safety. They're giving it their all. They're taking a lot of risks. And it really builds to the aura of the match. So by the time you get to the final spot, you really, I think as a fan, you're already on edge. You don't know what to expect. It's just so masterfully done.
Yes. Well, that one was on my list. That was number 3 for me. Moving into my number 2 slot was from Final Battle 2008. Bryan Danielson versus Takeshi Morishima in a fight without honor at the Manhattan Center.
Yeah, so
that wasn't Manhattan Center. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say this was also on my list. It was number 4, but now I'm like thinking it probably should have been a little higher on my list. Now, you know, I have Kyle's wonderful notes in front of me too, so it's helping me remember the story and the build. But you know, and I'm guilty of this too. I always underestimate Morishima, and I don't know why I do that, because Morishima in Ring of Honor was awesome.
Yeah, and it's something we've talked about in the past, that Morishima's ROH World Title run does not get the credit that it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the end was probably prolonged a little longer than it needed to be. I don't think we needed Nigel to get 3, 4, 5, whatever it was, title shots at the end before he finally dethroned the monster. I don't think that was necessary, but you know, Morishima put out bangers against Bryan Danielson, against Claudio Castagnoli, against Nigel McGuinness, had a couple of good ones against Austin Aries, against Brent Albright.
Yeah.
Albright and Morishima had a heck of a match. And it's like, you know, he's putting out bangers and he's never getting the credit for it.
Yeah.
But,
sorry, go ahead.
So let's dive in. Their first match started at Manhattan Mayhem 2 in August of 2007. It was about 6 months in. Danielson had finally gotten his shot at the title. In the course of the match, Danielson famously suffered the detached retina from all the battery that he took, the face washes and everything else that he took from Morishima. And Morishima just overwhelmed him and beat him. The size and the intensity was just too much.
Mm-hmm.
So a month later, Danielson gets a second shot at the Man Up pay-per-view. Danielson is now wearing an eye patch and is saying that no matter what, if it ends his career to do this, it's been worth it, and he's gonna. And this time, Danielson is coming after Morishima from the bell. He is not going to give him a chance to get settled in. He's just going to attack, and it gets Morishima on the defensive. It challenges him in a way that some people haven't before, but that's when Morishima really takes this feud to the next level. Pre-match, he had promised Danielson that out of respect and the sense of honor, he would not go after the injured eye. But then as in the heat of the match, Morishima gets desperate and Morishima goes after the eye. And eventually we wind up with referee stoppage in just a little under 13 minutes, pretty short for an ROH World Title match and a Danielson World Title match. But it just put across this idea of he pushed Morishima so far that Now we had to do that. They traded DQ wins after each of them wound up attacking officials who were trying to keep them apart. And it got us to Final Battle 2007. And this was the blow off. This was a fight without honor. And this would wind up being Morishima's last match in Ring of Honor, actually. Violent as can be. Danielson throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Morishima. Multiple callbacks throughout the course of the feud. Morishima attacking the face and the eye. Danielson using the hammer from the ring bell to try to gouge out Morishima's eye like he did at Rising Above in December of 2007. So a year prior. And this was fantastic stuff. Danielson gets the win via referee stoppage. He wraps a chain around his forearm and starts laying in the hammer and anvil elbows with the chain wrapped arm into the jaw and the neck of Morishima until Todd Sinclair waves it off. And just an amazing, bloody culmination of a fantastic feud.
Yeah, this match has so many things you could want in a wrestling story. We have a clash of styles. We have a clash of perspective. We have legitimate hatred and a reason for the hatred. So this is really where we see Ring of Honor at a peak, I should say. I think 2008 was a great year for Ring of Honor. And I think Danielson, of course, had a lot to do with it. And now looking back, I underestimate Morishima. But yeah, in terms of very well-built long-term stories, this is a great blueprint for that.
Absolutely. And so I move on to my number one.
Yeah, you do your number one. I have a different number one for everyone watching.
Okay.
But I'll let Kyle do his number one.
My number one, Final Battle 2010, Mask versus Career, Kevin Steen versus El Generico. This was the culmination of an amazing, we thought it was the culmination of an amazing one-year story. But little did we know they had so much more left in the tank. Everybody knows Final Battle 2009, a year prior, Steen turns on Generico, waffles him with a chair shot, ends their tag team. Generico is completely distraught. Colt Cabana befriends him. And then ROH didn't have them interact for 4 months, actually. And because of the fact that Generico was emotionally not there, he couldn't bring himself to do that. And they did a really interesting thing with it. At the Big Bang in 2010, Generico could not bring himself to hit Steen. Even after everything Steen had done, Generico still could not hit him. Until after the match, they bust Steen and Steve Carino, who was credited for lighting this change in him at the time. They bust open Cabana, they attack him, and finally Generico is able to at least attack Steen, but they're quickly separated. And from there, we're off and running. Chicago Street Fight, April 2010. I was in attendance for that. It was amazing. Fantastic match. They brawled all over the Frontier Fieldhouse. An Anything Goes match on HDNet TV. We've talked in the past about how great the HDNet era is and what a cool thing that was. This is another great standout match there. Then they had their first one-on-one match in June of 2010 at Death Before Dishonor. I have 7 in my notes here. It was Death Before Dishonor 8, actually. So sad me. This was, and Generico was able to actually kick out of the package pile driver, which, this was, this is not the same old Generico anymore. This is a guy who was out for blood. They had another one-on-one, ends in a DQ. They run a steel cage tag match. There were a lot of tag matches in the course of this build with Generico and Cabana against Steen and Carino. Another steel cage tag match on HDNet, which is another excellent match. It's probably on one of the best of HDNet DVD sets. They had a double chain match at Glory by Honor, which culminated in Steen ripping the mask off of Generico as he went for the turnbuckle brainbuster, which was one of his big deal moves. He hasn't hit it much, obviously, late since, but Steen ripped the mask off and then challenged him on HDNet TV mask versus career. We have to do it one more time. And that's what got us to final battle.
This was also on my list because of course it was. Steen and Generico is one of those, I wouldn't say feuds, but there's times when they're friends. But a feud, one of those stories in wrestling that works in any place and any promotion at any time. This, of course, in Ring of Honor was fantastic, and the matches were great. But we see Steen and Generico in PWG, in other promotions, having these great all-time feuds. And I hate the term wrestling soulmates because I think it's cheesy. But if there was ever wrestling soulmates, it would be these two. I think this feud, it's fantastic. And I think that a certain promotion where they are both currently signed should think about revisiting it. But that's just, I guess, my biased opinion. But it's a great number one. I commend you for your number one.
Yeah. I would love to go into a deeper dive just on this feud because there's so much here. There's so much to unpack. Go find it. Whether it's online, whether it's on DVD, find it somewhere, watch it, enjoy it. It's absolutely perfect. It tells such an amazing story from beginning to end. And I don't want to give it short shrift, but we are trying to move on and get through these. Trust me, we'll talk more about Steen and Generico in the future. I promise.
Yes. So my number one is Adam Cole versus Jay Briscoe, Ring of Honor World Title. Of course, this is a long-term feud. They feud singles, they feud in factions and teams. And for the sake of brevity, because we don't have that much time left on this meeting, I'll just jump straight to our Fight Without Honor. It was absolutely brutal. Our victor is Jay Briscoe, of course. But to me, what really made this match stand above the other matches on our list is sort of the just sheer emotion involved. I think at this point in time, it's 2014. And I think, in terms of video package, promos, everything, both of these guys are really firing on all cylinders. And Adam Cole in particular, I really bought that he hated Jay Briscoe. So in 2014 was a weird time in wrestling, of course. So for me, this is my number one. Like I said, Jay Briscoe wins it. And if you like their Ladder Wars match, this one's better, in my opinion. It's way more brutal, despite the fact that it's not Ladder Wars. So that's my number one.
It's a solid pick. I mean, Jay has always excelled in this type of environment. Adam Cole has always been always been such a fantastically hateable heel. And, sometimes that's all you need is a great intense baby face and a hateable heel and
yes,
magic.
Absolutely. And I told Kyle this earlier, but I hope we see them together and interacting, feuding in some way